Is dangerous, and even in peacetime, Defence forces are always at risk. In 1996, 2 Black Hawk helicopters collided during night manoeuvres, killing 18. But Australia's worst peacetime defence disaster killed 82 sailors, including a commanding officer. It was the night the aircraft carrier Melbourne sliced the destroyer Voyager in two.
The Voyager, a £7 million destroyer handed over to the Navy only 7 years ago. A push-button robot ship that could be navigated and taken into action without a man on her bridge and deck. Today she lies in 2 pieces, 75 fathoms down, 17 miles out of Jervis Bay. 85 men have gone down with her. The acting Minister for the Navy, Dr. Forbes, has announced that 85 men are missing after last night's collision at sea between the destroyer Voyager and the aircraft carrier Melbourne. A casualty list will not be issued until all next of kin have been officially notified. Voyager sank off Jervis Bay, south of Sydney, late last night after being sliced in two by the aircraft carrier. Her bow section sank immediately, but the aft section floated for about 3 hours before it too went down.
News of a slightly diminishing toll of missing from the first estimates, the morale of the survivors, the struggle by the aircraft carrier Melbourne as she limps up the coast to Sydney. It is now known that 85 officers and men from the Voyager are missing and feared dead in most cases. The Navy has announced that the destroyer had 324 men on board when she went down after her nighttime collision with the carrier. The terrifying nighttime scene recreated by our artist shows how the 20,000-ton carrier sliced through the thin sides of the Voyager and how the ship, cut in two, plummeted to the bottom. Today's tragedy overrides the memory of happier days, such as on this occasion when the sleek destroyer was back from a tour of duty in Asian waters. The reunion, seen from the knowledge of today's tragedy, must now be a bitter memory for some who took part. 85 of the Voyager's crew who are feared to have gone down with the ship weren't present for today's sadder welcomes. The dead include many officers and key ratings, a staggering blow for the peacetime Navy.
Politicians again, this time the case of the disappearing Prime Minister Harold Holt, who succeeded Sir Robert Menzies on Australia Day 1966. Less than 2 years later, he would vanish without trace, swimming near Victoria's playground of the rich and famous Portsea.
Cheviot Beach, Portsea, Victoria. It was here just 1 week before Christmas in 1967 that Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared. Parliament had risen just a few days earlier, and the Prime Minister had left Canberra for Portsea to take a holiday. And on that fateful Sunday morning, the Prime Minister came down to this beach with friends for a swim. He entered the water here and was never seen again.
For 3 days, Victorian Police, the Army and the Navy conducted the most intense search operation Australia has seen. The Nine network was there too, providing live coverage to an anxious nation. A familiar figure in those dramatic telecasts was the missing Prime Minister's press secretary, Tony Eggleton.
Harold Holt had in fact stepped into the sea there just as the tide was turning. He'd stepped in at a place where the water was being siphoned very quickly between rocks, which would have carried him very quickly out to sea, and that once he had lost consciousness, which I will always believe occurred when a very large wave was seen breaking over him, and I suspect some flotsam and jetsam was in that wave which knocked him unconscious, that because of the currents and the tides, that the scientists estimated that even by the end of the first day, he could have been as much as 20 miles away from the spot. It was pretty hard to accept for days, leave alone in a matter of an hour, that Harold Holt was missing in the water. I mean, it was just not conceivable. And I thought perhaps Mrs. Holt's interpretation was the right one, that indeed he'd just swum out and was sitting in the sun somewhere on a rock. The biggest search ever undertaken was underway, and that went on for several weeks, in fact, because even after we had to reach the sad conclusion that clearly he had died, in the case of a Prime Minister who was missing, one wanted to find any evidence that one could of what had happened. Mrs. Holt's courage was a great support for me. It made my job that much easier. Within 24 hours, I think it was, of the episode, with all the press there and all the searchers, she agreed that she would like to go and thank the searchers personally, and we walked out up the cliffs, visited the command post, talked to the people who were searching. She wanted to give her personal thanks to the police, to the soldiers, to the sailors, and did it with great decorum and with great courage.
The cry of an anguished young mother echoed around Australia and the world at the start of a most incredible story. It involved a wild dog, a spiritual Aboriginal site, a small child and her deeply religious parents, many court appearances, just as many desert searches, and an amazing media frenzy. It involved a life sentence for murder, repeated appeals, and finally a pardon and compensation for wrongful conviction. But even today, the police remain unconvinced. It began when a family camping holiday went wrong.
The parents of Azaria Chamberlain have now left Ayers Rock to return to their Mount Isa Seventh-day Adventist church, and they've accepted that their 10-week-old baby is probably dead. We spoke to the distressed couple, Michael and Lindy Chamberlain, near the scene of the disappearance.
The light from the barbecue was shining on the upper half of the tent, not on the lower half of the tent. It's, I could only see the dingo from sort of the top of the shoulders up. And he came out in such a hurry, I thought there was no food in there, but he just might have damaged or mauled the baby. And I ran towards the tent. I was only 5 yards away from it, perhaps. I just yelled. There wasn't time to go and tell people. I just yelled out, "Has anyone got a torch? The dingo's got my baby."
Several days after her disappearance, searchers found the baby's blood-stained clothes in a rock crevice about 400 metres from the camp tent. The baby's mother, Mrs. Lindy Chamberlain, told police at the time that she thought she saw a wild dog carrying a bundle away from the camp area. Mrs. Chamberlain seemed adamant that an animal had taken her child.
And I thought to myself, it's not possible. Can't have taken the baby. It was empty. I ran out of the tent. I said to Michael, "The dingo's got the baby."
Lindy and Michael Chamberlain divorced and remarried. No one has conclusively blamed the dingo. Australia's greatest mystery, greater perhaps than whatever happened to Harold Holt, remains the disappearance of the Beaumont children, Jane, Grant and Anna, in Adelaide in 1966. They've never been found, and their initial disappearance became a news media event. You see, there was no news, no clues, no sighting, no results, and that was 37 years ago. I turned on the radio for the 6 o'clock news one Sunday morning and wished I hadn't. Hundreds believed dead and injured in a Bali nightclub blast, many of them young Australians. The Australian death toll was 88, and while this was not on our soil, it was in a place where Aussies were popular, were relaxed, were unsuspecting victims. Paddy's Bar and the Azaria Club in overcrowded, bustling Kuta became war zones. Fear, terror, who could describe it? Total strangers bonded by tragedy. Nine newsman Mark Redding was there on holiday.
It was 11:15 at night, peak of party time in the clubs of Kuta, when the terrorists began their coordinated attack. The two bombs soon had much of the area on fire. The first blast was in Paddy's Bar. It sent a crowd of survivors charging onto the street. Then a second, much larger explosion, apparently a car bomb, went off outside the Azaria Club on the opposite side of the road. The shockwave rattled windows 10 kilometres away. David Hodder was inside Paddy's.
The first blast went off and I just thought it was a firecracker because it didn't sort of affect us where we were, and then the second blast knocked everyone to the ground, and when I came to, the roof was down and flames flying out of it, and people running over me. I came to, and the only way out was a 3-metre wall on either side of the pub.
Another Australian, Martin Lyons, was walking out of a nearby hotel.
And basically we were just confronted with masses of people running towards us up the street.
And there was just a procession of people covered in blood, covered in glass, glass shards embedded into people. People's backs had obviously been on fire. It was just horrible.
The explosions and the subsequent fire destroyed an entire block. Martin Lyons made for the nearest hospital to volunteer his help.
It was nothing quite like anything I've seen. There was more blood, the smell of the burnt skin from these guys, and the pain that they're in, you can't really put that into words.
Only a few minutes earlier, I had been inside the Sari Club. With friends, we decided to go across the road to Paddy's. It was a decision which probably saved our lives. This is the heart of the Coota nightclub area. I was standing inside Paddy's bar, which is now a blackened wreck behind me, when the first bomb exploded. Less than 60 seconds later, and with people running for their lives, a second bomb went off across the street. For the lucky ones, including myself, we escaped with no more than shock and deafness as a result of the blast. The name Bali carries many happy memories for many Australians, but this atrocity has destroyed the old idea that this holiday island is a haven from the troubles of the world. The death toll has been steadily climbing through the day as the rescue teams recovered bodies from the ruins of the two clubs.
This water-filled crater thought to be the spot where the car bomb went off.
So many of these people are dead, I mean, here in Sari Club, they are dead,
One of the guys who's looking for, I think, 8 or 9 of his friends just said that they've been down to the morgue and it's just not a pretty sight.
This attack is overwhelming the 5 major hospitals nearest to Coota. Some emergency boards are dominated by Australian names. Many Aussies are desperate to be evacuated back home.
We've got a couple of other friends that are pretty badly burnt and in hospital here, but the conditions are absolutely atrocious. So we're just trying to organise to get them out of here, actually, and get them back to Australia.
In the past few days, there have been warnings of violence in Indonesia linked to extremist Muslim groups, possibly connected with Al-Qaeda. In the long term, this attack may be devastating for the country's tourist industry.
It's very clear that the explosion was targeted at foreigners, so it's going to hurt the nation really bad.
No thought of the future for most right now. The only priority is saving survivors and getting information to families. It's becoming clear there have been many acts of bravery during last night's terror. Young travellers putting their own lives at risk as they tried to save mates and strangers.
The flames went through the place that quick. It was just catching people there. And we just tried to get as many people out as we could before it was just too late.
Despite some fresh concerns about terrorist activity in Indonesia, there was no special security in Bali. This was an easy target for whoever carried out the bombings. Now begins the business of hunting down the killers. In Bali, Mark Reddings, National 9 News.
It was an American who wrote of the Vietnam War as a John Wayne shoot-'em-up test of manhood, which turned out to be a warped version of Peter Pan. Vietnam was a brutal Never Never Land outside time and space, where little boys didn't have time to grow up. They just grew old before their time. 474 young Australians didn't get the chance to grow old. More than 2,400 still bear the physical scars. Almost the same number are not the men and women they used to be. The Vietnam War was about politics and futility, but frighteningly, it was the first television war. It was in your house at dinner time, supper time, and in the morning. They say television coverage shaped people's opinions on Australian involvement, resulting in nationwide protests and shameful demonstrations against young Australians, many of them conscripts.
Vietnam, often dubbed the television war. For Australia and the United States, it was to become the most divisive political issue either nation has ever known. Television monitored the conflict in the jungles and at home.
Well, all wars aren't very nice, but yes, it was dirty war. It was a very dirty war. The civilian population in Vietnam still work their rice paddies and everything like that, and the fellow digging his hoe and his rice in the paddock could be well setting off a bomb that's planted underneath the road to knock out an armoured vehicle or something. So you didn't know when you were going to get hit. The American military machine fought the war in Vietnam the way they were allowed to fight the war in Vietnam. When politicians start playing soldiers and telling generals how to run a military campaign, then you get problems. The first thing that stopped the winning of Vietnam was the non-acceptance of casualties, to poison the minds of people back home, which caused a great demoralising effect on the soldiers in the field. It used to embarrass me to see an Australian newspaper, especially when I had Americans alongside me and they'd pick it up and I'd say, well, that's not my country, you know. But I think Australia lost somewhere in the vicinity of about 390 or 400 men over a period of 10 years war in Vietnam. When you consider the road casualties for the same age bracket, mind you, right? Here in Australia, I don't see them having moratoriums and save our daughters and save our sons. I think there was a tremendous psychological effect on the digger, both whilst he was in Vietnam and certainly when he came home. His mates out in Civvy Street, he never went away. His wife, his mother, his family, his father, seen a young boy go away, and here is a man back, and he comes home to what? A whole heap of demonstrators and somebody calling him a murderer and everything like that because he's been in Vietnam. Of course, it must psychologically have some effect. Now, some 10 years after, you know, and we're going 10 years after, in the case of 1970 tearbreak, things are starting to happen to him, and he says, well, there is a problem. Now, and the digger won't say anything now because he got knocked back before. A lot of the older generation don't accept it as a war. They just say, oh, he was a, you know, it's just not there. They don't want to know it. The psychological effect is compounding all the time. I don't say all, but there is quite a number of cases. Now, these cases have to be remedied immediately.
It's almost as if, for you, the Vietnam War isn't over.
The Vietnam War is over, but the battle of getting the veteran who is suffering from some disability from the war in Vietnam, that is not over, and it won't be over for a long time yet.